My Uncle Caleb buried a steel container in the back acre 4 days before the world stopped answering its phones, and I watched him do it from the kitchen window with a glass of warm tap water sweating in my hand. I was 26, freshly unemployed, and crashing in his guest room because my apartment in Asheville had become a museum of unpaid notices. He didn't know I was watching. He thought I was still asleep upstairs, the way I usually was at 6 in the morning. The way a man who has lost his job tends to sleep long, ugly, full of dreams about elevators that never arrive. But I'd woken up thirsty, and now I was witnessing something I wasn't supposed to see. He was digging behind the tool shed, in the soft patch where the pines thinned and the deer trail bent toward the creek. The container was the size of a footlocker, painted that ugly industrial green the government uses when it wants you to look away. He had a padlock on it the size of my fist. He didn't dig deep, maybe 3 feet. And he worked fast for a man of 58, with a bad lower back. When he was done, he stood over the disturbed earth for a long minute, both hands resting on the shovel handle. And he didn't pray, exactly, but he did something with his mouth that looked like apology. Then he came inside, washed his hands twice, and made me eggs. "You're up early," he said, sliding the plate across the counter without looking at me. "Couldn't sleep." That was the whole conversation. Caleb wasn't a talker. He'd been a logistics officer somewhere unspecified, retired into these 40 acres in western North Carolina. And he answered most questions, with a noise that lived in the back of his throat. My mother, his sister, used to call him the family vault. Things went in. Nothing came out. When she died of a slow cancer 2 winters back, he attended the funeral, hugged me once, hard, and drove home the same afternoon. I hadn't seen him cry. I assumed he had, somewhere, alone, where it wouldn't inconvenience anyone. I didn't ask about the container. I told myself it was firearms he didn't want the ATF asking after, or cash, or the kind of paperwork men of his generation kept, in case the bank ever lied to them. I told myself a lot of things in those 4 days. None of them were what it actually was. Day 1 after the burial, the news showed a hospital in Charlotte turning ambulances away. Day 2, a press conference where a woman in a navy blazer used the phrase atypical neurological event and then refused 4 questions in a row. Day 3, the internet started lying. Videos appeared and disappeared, half of them obvious nonsense, the other half too steady to be nonsense. Day 4, Caleb walked into the living room while I was scrolling and said, "Eli, put the phone down. Come help me move the propane." I looked up. He had his coat on already. There was a smear of dirt across his knuckles that hadn't been there an hour before. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I just want it moved." We moved the propane. Then we moved the rain barrels. Then we moved a stack of canned goods from the basement to the storm cellar. And he checked the locks on 3 different doors, twice each. And when I finally said, "Uncle Caleb, are we doing something?" he stopped in the hallway with his hand on the cellar bolt and didn't turn around. "We're doing what I should have done in '96, he said. "Go to bed early tonight. Tomorrow's going to be a long one." I went to bed early. I didn't sleep. Somewhere past 2 in the morning, I heard the first gunshot from the highway, a flat, distant pop that the pines swallowed. And I lay there with my eyes open and understood, finally, that the container in the yard was about to matter. By dawn, the highway was a chord of car horns held too long, a music with no resolution, the kind of sound that means people who don't normally honk are honking now. Caleb was already up. He was at the kitchen table with a paper map spread between the salt shaker and a mug of black coffee, and he was drawing lines on it with a mechanical pencil. Not roads, routes. There's a difference, and he showed me without saying so. Roads go where the state put them. Routes go where you decide. Sit down, he said. Eat. We've got maybe an hour. An hour till what? Till the neighbors come asking. I sat. He'd made oatmeal, which I hated and ate anyway. He pushed a folded piece of paper across the table, a list, handwritten, his blocky engineer's letters. Water, iodine, 2 blades, the radio with the crank, the bag from the hall closet, the other bag from the truck, pills in the medicine cabinet, top shelf, the orange bottle only. I read it twice. Where are we going? Nowhere yet. Then why the list? He looked at me over the rim of the mug, and for the first time since I'd moved in, I saw him actually look at me, not the polite glance of a man tolerating a house guest, but the appraisal of someone deciding what I was worth in a calculation he'd already half finished. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't even cold. It was just honest. And honesty from Caleb was a thing you weren't ready for. Because the list goes in the truck, he said. And the truck stays packed. And if I tell you to get in it, you get in it. You don't ask. You don't pack anything extra. You don't go upstairs for your laptop. You get in, you close the door, and you let me drive. Are we clear? We're clear. Say it back. Don't ask, don't pack. Don't go upstairs. Get in the truck. Good. He folded the map. He went outside. I watched him walk past the tool shed, past the disturbed earth where the green container slept. And he didn't pause. He didn't even glance. That was the part that stayed with me, that he could walk past the thing he'd buried and not look at it. The way you don't look at a grave you dug yourself. The neighbor came at 8:45. Her name was Marisol Wren. She lived a quarter-mile down the gravel. She was somewhere in her mid-30s and worked nights at the urgent care in town. And she came up the drive on foot because, she said, her car wouldn't start and her phone wouldn't load anything. She had her daughter with her, a small girl, maybe 7, with her hair in 2 crooked braids and a stuffed fox tucked under one arm. The girl's name was Pia. I knew this because Marisol introduced them both at the door with a strange formal calm, like she was checking us into a hotel. Caleb, she said. The hospital called everyone in last night. I went. I came back. I'm not going again. Caleb didn't ask why. He just stepped aside and let them in. Pia walked past me into the living room and sat on the couch with the fox in her lap and didn't say a word. Marisol stood in the kitchen with her hands flat on the counter like she needed it to hold her up. And when Caleb put a mug of coffee in front of her, she stared at it for a long time before she drank. There was a man, she said finally, in the parking lot. He wasn't right. He came at a nurse. I saw his face. She stopped. She drank. His face wasn't a face anymore, Caleb. I don't know how to say it cleaner than that. You don't have to, Caleb said. I stood in the doorway between rooms and looked at the little girl on the couch. And she looked back at me. And her eyes were the eyes of someone who had already understood something the rest of us were still arguing about. The first one came out of the tree line at 11:12 in the morning. I know the time because I was staring at the microwave clock when Caleb said very quietly, "Eli, step back from the window." I didn't step back. I leaned closer. He was a man in a UPS uniform. The brown shirt was untucked on one side, and there was a dark stain down the front that hadn't been ironed in. He walked the way a person walks in a dream where their legs aren't quite their own. Too long a stride, the knee locking a half-second late, the head listing forward as if the neck had loosened in its socket. He came across the gravel toward the porch with no urgency at all. And that was the thing that made my stomach drop. He wasn't hunting. He was just going, the way water goes downhill, the way a moth goes to the porch light. He had heard us, or smelled us, or sensed whatever it is they sense, and now he was coming, and there was nothing personal in it. His face wasn't right. Marisol had been generous, calling it a face at all. Caleb moved past me with the kind of economy I'd only ever seen in old men who'd done specific work for a long time. He picked up a single-shot rifle from the corner behind the coat rack. I hadn't even noticed it standing there. Which tells you something about how I'd been living in his house. And he opened the front door 6 inches and put the barrel through the gap and waited. He didn't aim from the shoulder. He aimed from the hip, braced against the door frame. And his hand was steady in a way mine has never been steady about anything. He didn't fire. "Caleb," I said. "Wait." "Caleb, he's almost—" "Wait." The UPS man hit the bottom step. He didn't climb it. He walked into it, the way you'd walk into a wall in the dark. And he stopped there, his shin pressed against the wood, his arms hanging. And he made a sound I'm not going to try to describe, because every word I have for it would be a lie. It wasn't a moan, it wasn't a growl. It was something underneath language, and it came from a throat that didn't know it was a throat anymore. Caleb fired once. The sound inside the house was enormous. Pia didn't scream. That was almost worse. She just pressed her face into the fox and went very, very still. And Marisol crossed the room in 3 steps and put her body between the girl and the door without thinking about it, the way a hand goes up to block a thrown rock. Caleb closed the door. He set the rifle against the wall. He looked at me. "Help me drag him off the porch," he said. "What?" "He'll draw more if we leave him there. Help me drag him into the pines." I helped him. I'm telling you that part because I want to be honest about it. I helped him drag a man I'd watched die through my uncle's front door and across the gravel and into the soft brown needles under the pines. And the man weighed less than I expected. And his uniform smelled like copper and something sweeter underneath that I will not be naming. And when we let him go behind a fallen log, Caleb stood for a second with his hands on his knees and breathed. "That was Darrell Pence," he said. "He delivered my arthritis pills on Tuesdays. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Be useful." He straightened up. He wasn't looking at the body. He was looking past it, into the trees, where the gravel road curved out of sight toward the highway. "There'll be more by dark, probably a lot more. We need to talk about the box." "The box?" "In the yard, the one you saw me bury." I felt the blood leave my face in a slow tide. He had known I was watching. He had known the entire time, and he had let me think I'd gotten away with it. And now, finally, on a morning with a dead delivery man cooling under the pines, he was going to tell me what was in it. We walked out to the tool shed together. Marisol stayed with Pia inside, with the doors locked and the rifle on the kitchen table, and instructions not to open the door for anyone whose voice she didn't recognize on the second try. Caleb had a shovel over his shoulder and a key on a leather cord around his neck that I'd never noticed before. And the morning had gone that strange soft gray of a day that hasn't decided yet whether to rain. He dug while I watched. He was slower than he'd been 4 days ago. The adrenaline had cost him something. When the shovel finally struck metal, the sound was small and definite, like a coin dropped on a stove. "You're going to ask me what's in it," he said, not looking up. "I'm going to tell you. And then you're going to decide whether you still want to be in this house tonight." Why would I not want to be in this house? Because some things Once you know them, you don't get to unknow. And once you don't get to unknow them, you have to act on them. That's the rule. He scraped the last of the dirt off the lid. He took the key from around his neck. He didn't open the lock yet. He sat back on his heels and looked at me, and his eyes in that gray light were the color of river stones. Eli, your mother knew about this box, not the box itself, the contents. What? She didn't tell you because I asked her not to. I'm sorry about that. I'm genuinely sorry. But you were 19 and angry, and she was sick, and the timing was never right. And then she was gone. And I told myself I'd tell you when you were ready. And you never seemed ready. And now the world's ending, and I don't get to wait anymore. He turned the key. The padlock fell open with a small metallic sigh. He lifted the lid. Inside, packed in foam, were 3 things. A manila envelope, thick, sealed with red tape. A handgun in an oiled cloth, the kind of compact thing a person carries who hopes not to. And a smaller wooden box, lacquered, with my mother's initials burned into the lid, in a hand I recognized from birthday cards. The envelope first, Caleb said. Read it inside, not out here. Caleb, inside, Eli. There are eyes in these woods that weren't here yesterday. I looked up. I hadn't realized until he said it. But the birds had stopped. The whole back acre had gone into that particular silence that isn't quiet at all. It's the absence of quiet, the held breath of things that have noticed something and are deciding what to do about it. We took the envelope and the gun and the wooden box back to the house. Caleb left the steel container open in the dirt. He said we'd come back for the rest. He said it the way a man says a thing he doesn't believe but needs to hear out loud. At the kitchen table, with Marisol watching from the doorway and Pia asleep against her hip, I opened the envelope. There were papers inside, a lot of them. The top one was a photograph. My mother, maybe 22, standing on a concrete loading dock somewhere with 3 men in unmarked coveralls. One of the men was Caleb. The other 2 I didn't know. Behind them was a low building with no signage and a fence with 3 rows of wire across the top. And across the bottom of the photograph, someone had written, in pencil, Site 6, decommissioned 1997. I looked up at Caleb. He was watching me read with the patient stillness of a man who had rehearsed this moment so many times. The rehearsals had worn grooves in him. Your mother wasn't a librarian, he said. Not at first. She was a translator. So was I. We translated things that weren't supposed to exist into reports that were supposed to make them go away. He paused. Eli, we knew this was coming. Not when, but we knew the shape of it. I want to tell you I stood up. I want to tell you I shoved the chair back and demanded answers in a plea or in a voice that filled the room. The truth is, I sat very still and looked at the photograph of my mother, younger than I was now, smiling in a way I had never seen her smile in life. And I felt the floor of my understanding rearrange itself, quietly, the way a house settles in winter. Site 6, I said. 1 of 7. 6 was containment. The others were research. Caleb's hands were flat on the table. He hadn't touched the envelope. Your mother and I worked the language side. Pathogen behavior modeling pulled from foreign papers. Mostly Soviet leftovers nobody else could read fast enough. We didn't make the thing, Eli. I want you to hear me on that. We named it. We wrote the protocols. We put the words around it that let other people decide what to do. And what did they decide to do? They decided to bury it. In '97, 3 sites went into the ground. The samples, the notes, the live cultures. I helped seal one of them. Your mother signed off on another. And it got out. Something did. Maybe ours, maybe theirs. Maybe a cousin none of us knew about. The behavior I'm seeing on that highway is close to one of the strains in our files, but not exact. The incubation's wrong. The aggression curve is wrong. So it's mutated, or it's not ours, or somebody dug it up on purpose. He finally reached for the envelope. He slid a second photograph out from underneath the first. But that's not the part I needed you to see. The second photograph was of me. I was maybe 4. I was sitting on a hospital bed in a paper gown, and my mother was beside me holding a clipboard, and her face was the face of a woman trying very hard not to cry in front of a child. There was a butterfly bandage on the inside of my left elbow. I have a scar there. I've had it my whole life. I'd been told I fell off a swing. What is this? You were exposed, Eli. Not infected. Exposed. We don't know how. We think a vial cracked at the Asheville lab, and your mother brought it home on her coat. You were a year and a half old. You ran a fever for 9 days. You should not have survived it. You did. And every 6 months until you were 12. We drew blood from you and ran it against the active samples, and your blood did something we couldn't explain. We wrote a paper about it. We never published. They wouldn't let us. I looked at the scar on my arm. I had touched it 1,000 times in my life and never asked it a single question. I'm immune. We don't know that. We know your antibodies, at age 12, neutralized one specific strain in a petri dish. We don't know about whatever's walking around outside right now. We don't know if the immunity held. We don't know if you can pass it on. We don't know anything useful, Eli, except that you are the only person I have ever met whose blood did that. Says he says, and the people who wrote the original protocols are mostly dead or hiding or pretending they were dental hygienists their whole lives. Why are you telling me now? Because somebody is going to come looking. Not today, maybe not this week. But the same files that name this thing have your name in the margins. And there are people who would walk through every barricade in this country to get a vial of you. He closed the envelope. And because if I die before I tell you, you'll go your whole life thinking you fell off a swing. Marisol, in the doorway, had not made a sound. When I looked up, she was watching me with an expression I couldn't read. And Pia was awake against her hip, staring at me with her huge, dark, steady eyes. And I realized that whatever happened next, I was no longer in a story about hiding from the woods. We didn't leave that day. Caleb wanted to. He stood at the window after dark, counting the shapes that drifted across the lower field, and his jaw worked the way it did when he was running numbers behind his teeth. But Pia had a fever by then, low. Probably nothing. Probably just the long walk and the cold morning. But Marisol's whole body locked when she felt the girl's forehead. And Caleb watched her lock and made a decision. One more night, he said. We move at first light. We didn't sleep. Not really. I took the second watch, sitting in the kitchen with the single-shot rifle across my knees and the radio cranked low, listening to a voice from Knoxville read evacuation corridor numbers until the voice stopped mid-sentence, and a different voice, calmer and more practiced, came on and started reading them again from the top. Nobody said the word quarantine. Nobody said outbreak. They said contingency. And they said staging area. And they said, please remain in your homes until directed otherwise. And somewhere underneath all of it I could hear, faintly, what sounded like a generator running and someone weeping just off mic. Marisol came into the kitchen around 3. She poured herself water from the pitcher and sat down across from me and didn't speak for a long time. How much of that did you know? She said finally. About yourself. None of it. None. I knew I had a scar. I knew my mother got quiet when I asked about it. She nodded slowly. She turned the glass on the table. She was a woman who had triaged for a living, and I could see her doing it now, sorting me into a category, deciding what kind of resource I was. My husband died 18 months ago, she said. It wasn't a non sequitur. I understood that immediately. Aneurysm. He was 36. He was making pancakes. Pia found him. She drank. I tell you this because I want you to understand that I have already lost the thing I was most afraid of losing. So when I tell you I will do anything to keep that child alive, I want you to hear it as information, not as threat. I hear it as information. Good. She set the glass down. Your uncle thinks you're valuable. I think he's right. And I think that makes you dangerous to be near. And I also think you're the best chance my daughter has of growing up. So we are going to be very honest with each other from now on, Eli. Can you agree to that? Yes. If you decide to leave us at any point, you tell me to my face. You don't slip out at night. You don't write a note. I won't leave you. You don't know that yet. You're answering as the person you were yesterday. I'm asking the person you're going to be in a week. She reached across the table and put her hand on my wrist, not warmly, not coldly, just to make sure I was listening, with the part of me that listens. If you decide to leave, you tell me. That's all I'm asking. I'll tell you. She let go. She finished the water. She went back to Pia. I sat in the kitchen until the sky outside the window started to gray. And somewhere around 4:30, I heard the back screen door open, very softly. And I went to the hallway, and Caleb was standing there in his boots and coat with a wooden box from the steel container under his arm. Where are you going? To bury something deeper. He didn't look at me. Your mother left instructions. I haven't followed them yet. I'm going to follow them now, in case I don't get another chance. What's in the wooden box? He paused. He looked at the floor. Her notes, he said. On you, the originals. The only copies. If they find them, they don't need you alive. He went out into the dark. I let him go. He came back 40 minutes later with mud on his knees and didn't tell me where he'd put it. I didn't ask. I understood the architecture of what he was doing. Keep the knowledge distributed. Keep no single person able to give up the whole picture. And I understood that he was protecting me by not telling me. And I understood, with a low, cold clarity, that this also meant he expected to be questioned by someone who would know how to ask. We left at 6:14 in the morning. I know the time because Caleb said it out loud as he turned the key in the truck. A small, precise habit of a man who used to write things down for a living. The truck was a 2003 Ford with a tarp-covered bed and a second fuel tank he'd installed himself, and it was, I realized, as we pulled out of the gravel drive. The truck he'd been packing for years. Not days, years. The straps were worn. The crates inside the bed had labels he'd written and then crossed out and rewritten, the way a man does when he keeps changing his mind about what the world is going to need. Marisol sat in the back with Pia. I sat in the passenger seat with the map on my knees and the single-shot rifle between my feet. Caleb drove without the headlights for the first half-mile, navigating by the lightening sky and the pale strip of gravel. And then he switched them on as we hit the county road and said quietly, "If we see anyone alive on the road, we don't stop. If we see anyone dead, we don't slow down. If we see anyone in between, you tell me which one they are and I'll make the call." What's the destination? A fire tower, north, 22 miles. It's high, it's defensible. It has a cistern. and it's not on any current map I know about. Who else knows about it? 2 people. One of them is in the truck. And the other? He didn't answer. We made it 11 miles before we saw the first roadblock. It wasn't military. That was the thing that scared me. I'd been expecting uniforms, sandbags, the structured cruelty of an organized state. What we got instead was 3 pickup trucks across the road, and 4 men standing in front of them in hunting jackets with rifles held in the casual carry of people who were not yet pointing them at us, but had decided in advance they might. Caleb slowed. He did not stop. Eli, put the rifle on the floor. Hands on the dash. Don't speak. Caleb, hands on the dash. I put my hands on the dash. He coasted us to within 30 feet of the trucks and rolled his window down and lifted one hand out of it in a slow, open palm gesture that was older than any of us. One of the men walked forward. He was maybe 40, broad, with a beard going gray at the corners, and he held the rifle at port arms and looked into the cab and saw Marisol and Pia in the back. And his expression did something complicated. "Where are you headed?" he said. "North," Caleb said. "Family land." "Family land where?" "North." The man's mouth tightened. "We've got a sick woman in the greenhouse. We need a doctor. The lady in back, she a nurse?" I felt Marisol go still behind me. "She's a mother," Caleb said. "She's not stopping." "That ain't your call, friend." "It's hers, and she's already made it. Step aside, please." The man didn't step aside. He looked at Marisol through the back window. He looked at Pia. He looked for a long second at me. And his eyes lingered the way the eyes of a tired man linger on a stranger who might be the answer to a question. Then he stepped aside. I didn't understand why until we were 3 miles past the roadblock. And Caleb said, without looking at me, he recognized the truck. He was at Site 6 in 95. He was a guard. He exhaled. He's going to remember in about an hour, and then he's going to come looking. The fire tower stood on a bald shoulder of mountain that the locals called Hare's Ridge, though nobody we passed on the way up looked like they remembered hares or ridges or any of the small, ordinary words that used to organize the world. The road thinned to a track, the track thinned to ruts, and the ruts ended at a chained gate that Caleb opened with a key from the same leather cord around his neck. We drove through. He locked the gate behind us. He drove another half-mile and parked the truck under a stand of hemlocks where the canopy was thick enough to hide it from the air. "From the air," I said. "Habit," he said. We climbed. The tower was 4 flights of switchback steel stairs bolted to a creosoted timber frame, and the cabin at the top was 8 feet by 8 feet with windows on all 4 sides and a wood stove the size of a bread box, and a cot that someone had folded a wool blanket on a long time ago. Caleb had stocked it. Not lavishly, he wasn't that kind of man, but enough. Rice, beans, iodine tablets, a second radio, a rifle that wasn't the single shot mounted on brackets along the north wall, 6 full water jugs, a first aid kit organized with the same blocky engineer's labels as everything else he'd ever owned. Pia walked into the cabin, looked at the cot, looked at the stove, looked at her mother, and said, "Is this where we live now?" "For a little while, baby." "Okay." She sat on the cot with the fox in her lap, and she watched the trees through the south window. And she didn't ask another question for the rest of the afternoon. We set up. Marisol took inventory. She had the steadiest hands of any of us, and she did it the way she'd probably done 100 urgent care intake nights, with a pencil and a small, unbothered hum. Caleb sat at the north window with binoculars and watched the road we'd come up. I unpacked the truck in 3 trips up and down the stairs, my thighs burning by the second. And on the third trip, near the bottom of the last crate, I found something Caleb hadn't told me he'd packed. It was the wooden box, my mother's initials, burned in her own hand. I carried it up the stairs slowly. "You said you buried it," I said, setting it on the floor of the cabin. He didn't turn from the window. "I buried the originals. That's a copy. I made one. Years ago. In case." "In case of what?" "In case the man at the roadblock remembered before I was ready." I sat down on the floor next to the box. I didn't open it. I just put my hand flat on the lid and felt the grain of the wood and the small ridges of my mother's burned initials. And I thought about her sitting at some kitchen table I never saw, in some year before I existed, writing notes about a thing she would later spend my whole childhood not telling me about. I wasn't angry. That surprised me. I had expected to be angry. What I felt instead was something quieter and harder to name, or a kind of grief for the version of her I thought I'd known, and a kind of recognition for the version I was meeting now. "I want to read them," I said. "Tonight," Caleb said. "Not now. Now we watch the road." We watched the road. The light came down through the hemlocks and long gold bars, and the wind moved in the canopy like something breathing in its sleep. And twice in the next hour, I saw movement at the edge of the tree line below, not the loose drift of the infected, but the deliberate placement of feet by someone who knew how to move in woods. Caleb saw it too. He didn't say anything. He just lowered the binoculars and reached for the rifle on the north wall. The man came out of the trees alone at 4:12 in the afternoon, which I know because Caleb said it out loud. That same precise habit, a man marking time the way other men mark territory. He stopped at the foot of the tower and looked up. He didn't raise a weapon. He didn't call out. He just stood there in his hunting jacket with his rifle slung across his back and waited for us to acknowledge that we'd seen him. It was the bearded man from the roadblock. Caleb went down. He told me to stay in the cabin. He told Marisol to take Pia into the corner, away from the windows. I watched from the north window as my uncle descended 4 flights of switchback steel, and I had never in my life been so aware of how old he was, the slight catch in his right knee. The way his hand kept brushing the railing, the slow, careful placement of each boot. He'd lived a whole life I'd never seen, and now he was walking down a tower to talk to a man who'd known him during it. They stood about 10 feet apart in the clearing. They talked for a long time. I couldn't hear any of it. Marisol came and stood beside me at the window, with her arms crossed tight across her chest. And Pia stayed in the corner with the fox. And the 3 of us breathed quietly and watched 2 old men in a clearing remember each other. At one point, the bearded man put his hands on his hips and looked at the ground for almost a full minute. At another point, Caleb put a hand on his shoulder briefly, and the bearded man didn't shake it off. Toward the end, the bearded man took a folded paper out of his jacket and gave it to Caleb. And Caleb looked at it and folded it again and put it in his own pocket without reading it twice. Then the bearded man walked back into the trees, and Caleb climbed the tower. And when he came into the cabin, he sat down on the cot next to Pia and put his elbows on his knees and was quiet for a long time before he spoke. "His name is Howell," he said. "He was a corporal at Site 6 in 95 and 96. He has a wife. She's the sick woman in the greenhouse. She's not infected. She has a kidney thing, and she needs dialysis, and there isn't any. He came up here because he remembered the truck, and he remembered me, and he was hoping I'd have something." Caleb exhaled. "I don't have anything that helps a kidney." "What did he give you?" I said. Caleb took the paper out of his pocket. He unfolded it on the floor between us. It was a list of names, 11 names. Some of them had small marks beside them. Checks, slashes, one circle. People from the program, he said. He's been keeping track. The checks are confirmed dead. The slashes are confirmed gone, moved, vanished, scrubbed. The circle is the one he thinks is still active. Active how? Active as in looking, as in employed by whatever piece of the old apparatus survived, as in driving up this mountain in the next 48 hours if my name has gone into any system Howell knows about. The circle was around a name I didn't recognize, Dr. Aubrey Lynn. Did Howell tell anyone we were up here? No, but he was at the roadblock with 3 other men, and one of them was on a radio when we drove through. And he can't promise me what they did or didn't say. He came up here to warn me, Eli. He didn't have to. He's a decent man inside a bad decade. What did you give him for the warning? Caleb didn't answer right away. He folded the paper. He put it back in his pocket. I gave him the address of a man in Tennessee, he said, who used to run a dialysis machine off a diesel generator. I don't know if that man is still alive. I gave it to him anyway. Marisol behind us said very quietly, "That was kind." It was a debt, Caleb said. It wasn't kindness. That night, I opened the wooden box. Marisol had gone down to sleep on a bedroll she'd laid across the lower landing, where she could hear both the stairs and Pia's breathing through the cabin floor. Caleb was on watch at the north window with a thermos of black coffee gone cold. Pia was asleep on the cot under the wool blanket with the fox tucked against her chin. I sat on the floor in the south corner with a battery lantern between my knees and lifted the lacquered lid. The notes inside were not what I'd expected. I'd been imagining lab reports the cold language of percentages and protocols. There was some of that. But on top, in a manila folder labeled simply Eli, were letters. My mother had written me letters. 41 of them, by my count, dated from the year I was 2 until the year before she died. She had never given them to me. She had given them to Caleb, who had put them in a box, which he had buried in his yard. I read them in order. The early ones were short. Today you said the word window. You said it 12 times. You are the most stubborn person I know, and I love you for it. The middle ones were longer and harder. I am writing this from a parking lot. I have just signed a paper I am not allowed to tell you about. The paper says that if anything ever happens to me, you are to be protected by your uncle. I am sorry that I cannot tell you why. I'm sorry that I will probably never tell you why. I am sorry that the world has decided you are a piece of information instead of a child. The late ones, written when she was already sick, were the hardest. Eli, if you are reading this, then either I have died or the world has ended. And in either case, I owe you an apology I cannot make in person. I want you to know that nothing about you is wrong. The thing in your blood is not a curse. It is not a destiny. It is a fact. The same way your eye color is a fact. And you do not owe it your life. You do not have to be a cure. You do not have to be a hero. You can run. You can hide. You can be selfish. I will not be there to judge you, and I would not judge you if I were. The only thing I ask is that whatever you choose it. Do not let anyone, not your uncle, not a government, not a man with a kind voice and a clipboard, choose it for you. Promise me that, and I'm at peace. I love you. I love you. I love you. Mom. I sat on the floor for a long time after I read the last letter. I didn't cry. I don't know why. I think I had used the crying part of myself up earlier. In the kitchen, watching Daryl Pence walk into the bottom step, there was nothing left for letters. I closed the folder. I closed the box. I went to the north window and stood next to Caleb in the dark. "She wrote me letters," I said. "I know. You never gave them to me. She didn't want me to, not while she was alive. She wanted you to know her as she was, not as she was when she was afraid. And after she died?" "After she died, I was a coward," he said simply. "I'm sorry." I watched the trees for a while. The moon was up and the canopy moved, and somewhere in the lower clearing something walked through the leaves with the wrong number of feet, or the right number arranged wrong, and went away again. "I'm not going to be a cure," I said. "Good. I might still help, if I can, on my terms. Better?" He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes on the road. But his hand, after a moment, came up off the rifle and rested briefly on my shoulder. And that was the most he had ever touched me in my adult life. And it was enough. She came up the mountain on the third morning, alone, in a small gray hatchback that had no business on that road. We watched her for the last mile through the binoculars, a woman in her late 50s, silver blonde hair cropped short, wearing a navy coat over what looked like surgical scrubs. Driving with the patient, frowning concentration of someone who had not been behind a wheel often in the last decade. She parked at the chained gate. She got out. She did not try to open the gate. She walked up to it, set a leather satchel on the ground beside her feet, and stood there with her hands clasped in front of her, the way a person stands when they want very badly to be seen as unarmed. Caleb lowered the binoculars. "That's her," he said. "You're sure?" "I knew her for 11 years. That's her." He went down. He took the rifle. He told me to stay in the cabin, and this time I refused, not loudly, not dramatically, just by standing up and saying no. And he looked at me for a long second and didn't argue, which I think surprised both of us. We went down together. Marisol stayed with Pia at the top of the stairs, where she could see us and the road both, with a single shot across her knees and an expression I had not seen her wear before, the expression of a woman who had decided, somewhere in the last 72 hours, that she was capable of killing a stranger. "Doctor?" Aubrey Lynn watched us come down through the gate. She did not move. When we were 10 feet from her, she spoke first. "Caleb, I want to thank you for not shooting me from the tower. The day's young. Fair." She did not smile. She looked at me. Her eyes were a very pale gray, and they did not flinch when they landed on me, the way most people's eyes flinched once they'd been told what I was. "Eli, I held you when you were 9 days old. You won't remember. I was your mother's friend before I was anyone's doctor. You're in the circle on Howell's list." She blinked. It was the only sign of surprise she gave. "Howell," she said. "Of course, I always liked him. He had a conscience that was almost a liability." She looked back at Caleb. "I'm not here for what you think I'm here for. Tell me what you're here for." "To warn you, and to ask you something. In that order." Caleb didn't lower the rifle, but he didn't raise it either. He nodded once. "The warning," she said. "There's a convoy out of Oak Ridge. 3 vehicles. They left at dawn. They have a list of program-adjacent persons, and Eli's name is on it, and yours is on it, and mine is on it, and they're working the list north. They'll be here by dusk, maybe sooner. Working it how? Aggressively." Her mouth tightened. "They are operating under an executive directive that was signed 48 hours ago, and that does not, as far as I can tell, require them to bring anyone in alive. They are pretending it does, on paper. In practice, they have already shot 2 people I knew personally. And the ask. She looked at me again. I would like to draw 2 vials of your blood, here, today, in the next 20 minutes. I will not take you with me. I will not tell anyone you are here. I will drive south with the vials in a cooler, and I will give them to a research group in Atlanta that is not on any of these lists, that does not work for the convoy, and that has, in my professional opinion, a non-trivial chance of producing something useful in the next 6 months. You can say no. If you say no, I will get in my car and drive away, and you will never see me again. If you say yes, I will be in your debt, and Caleb will tell you that my debts get paid. I looked at Caleb. He was looking at her. Her debts get paid, he said. I want to tell you I thought about it for a long time. I want to tell you I weighed every variable, consulted my conscience, considered the people in Atlanta and the convoy from Oak Ridge and the small dark eyes of a girl with a stuffed fox at the top of a tower. The truth is, I thought about my mother's letter, the part where she said you do not have to be a cure, and underneath that, I thought about the second part, the part where she said whatever you choose it. And I understood that the letter had been preparing me for exactly this moment, and that she had known, somehow, that someone like Dr. Lynn would eventually stand at a gate and ask. 2 vials, I said. Here, now. You don't take samples of anything else. You don't photograph me. You don't write my name on the tubes. Agreed. And if you come back alone, and you call ahead on the radio frequency Caleb gives you. And if I'm not here anymore, you don't look for me. Agreed. She drew the blood at the back of the hatchback on the tailgate, with the satchel open beside her. She worked quickly and cleanly, the way a person works who has done a thing 10,000 times and is also aware that the woods around her contain something that wants to eat her. She labeled the vials with a code that meant nothing to me. She put them in a small insulated cooler. She closed the cooler. She turned to me with the alcohol swab still in her gloved hand and stopped. Your mother, she said, was the bravest person I've ever known. I want you to hear that from someone who is not in your family. She did not enjoy the work. She did it because she believed someone would have to, and she believed it should be someone who would lose sleep over it. She lost a great deal of sleep, Eli. I sat with her through some of those nights. I want you to know that she was not a monster. Neither am I. We did monstrous things in service of what we thought was containment. And the containment failed. And now we are old. And the world is ending. And the best I can offer you is 2 vials and a promise. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. She closed the satchel. She looked at Caleb. The convoy. They have a tracker on Howell's truck. He doesn't know. I would have told him, but I didn't have time. They followed him to the greenhouse. They will follow his earlier route back. They will find your gravel road by tonight. Caleb's face didn't change. How long do we have? 6 hours, maybe 4. Get off this mountain by dark. This mountain is the plan. Then you need a new plan. She got in the hatchback. She turned it around in the narrow space with the calm of a woman who had decided long ago not to be embarrassed by anything. Before she pulled away, she rolled down the window and looked at me one more time. Eli, if we make something from what's in this cooler and it works and it gets out into the world, I will not name you in any paper. I will not put your name in any file. You will be a footnote that says, Donor Anonymous. Your mother made me promise that in 98, when you were 6 years old, and I was already afraid of what was coming. I am keeping the promise. I want you to know I'm keeping it. She drove away. We climbed the tower in silence. Caleb walked ahead of me on the stairs, and his right knee caught on the 3rd landing. and he gripped the railing harder than I'd seen him grip anything. And I realized he was deciding something. At the top, in the cabin, with Marisol and Pia watching, he set the rifle on the table and turned to all of us and said, "We're leaving in an hour. I know where we're going. None of you are going to like it." The place he had in mind was a limestone quarry 40 miles east, abandoned in the 70s, with a flooded lower pit and a network of equipment tunnels cut into the rock face that nobody had mapped in decades. Caleb had been there once, in '89, on a survey job he'd taken between contracts. He remembered the tunnels. He remembered a steel door at the back of one of them that had been padlocked then, and might still be padlocked now. And he remembered, more importantly, that the quarry sat in a dead zone between 3 counties where no jurisdiction had ever properly settled who was responsible for it. "It's not better than the tower," he said. "It's just different. The convoy has the tower. They don't have the quarry." "Until they do," Marisol said. "Until they do." We packed in 40 minutes. We took what we could carry and left what we couldn't. And Caleb stood at the door of the cabin and looked at his stores, the rice, the beans, the iodine, the years of careful preparation. And his face did something I will not describe, because it was his and not mine. Then he closed the door. He did not lock it. He said very quietly, "If somebody honest finds this, let them have it." And we went down the stairs. We did not make it to the truck before the first shot. It came from the ridge above the gate, a single crack that ricocheted off the steel of the tower's lower frame and went into the hemlocks somewhere behind us with a small definite sound. Caleb dropped, not hit, just down, the way a man drops who has been shot at before and knows that the ground is a friend. The rest of us dropped behind him. 200 yards, he said. South Ridge. 1 shooter, maybe 2. They're testing. They want us to run for the truck. What do? We don't run for the truck. He looked at me. He looked at Marisol. He looked at Pia, who was pressed against her mother's side with both hands over her ears in a small, precise gesture that meant she had been preparing for loud sounds since she was old enough to make decisions. "Eli," he said, "there's a deer trail behind the cistern. It cuts east through the laurel and comes out on an old logging road 2 miles down. The keys to the truck are in my left coat pocket. I'm going to give them to you. You and Marisol and Pia are going to take the trail. I'm going to take the truck." "No." "Eli." "No, Caleb, no." He grabbed my collar, not roughly, firmly, the way a man grabs another man whose attention he requires. "Listen to me. They want you. They will follow the truck because the truck is loud, and the truck is mine. They will not follow a deer trail because they do not know it exists. I am going to drive for 90 minutes in the wrong direction, and then I am going to stop. And I am going to wait for them. And when they get there, I am going to be a 60-year-old man, alone, in a truck with a rifle and a story. And they will spend a long time deciding what to do with me. And that long time is what buys you the quarry. Do you understand me? Caleb, do you understand me?" I understood him. He pressed the keys into my hand. He pressed a folded paper into my other hand, the map, with the quarry circled in his blocky engineer's letters. He looked at Marisol over my shoulder and said, "He is your responsibility now, and you are his. The girl is both of yours." "I know," Marisol said. He didn't say goodbye. He turned and ran in a low crouch toward the truck, and the second shot cracked off the gravel behind him, and the third missed him entirely. And he got in the cab and started the engine, and the truck roared down the gravel road in a spray of dust. And a moment later, We heard 2 vehicles start up on the south ridge and follow him, and then the woods went very, very quiet. We took the deer trail. Marisol went first with the single shot, Pia in the middle holding the back of her mother's coat, and me at the rear with a backpack and a kitchen knife, and a head full of static that I had to keep clearing, because if I let it settle, I would sit down on the trail and not get up again. The laurel was thick. The trail was narrow. Pia did not cry. She walked the way her mother walked, in small, steady steps, and twice she looked back at me to make sure I was still there. And both times, I nodded, and she nodded back. And that was our whole conversation for 2 miles. We came out on the logging road at dusk. We walked the logging road for another 3 miles. We did not see any infected. We did not see any people. The world, for those 3 miles, was only the sound of our boots and the small rustle of Pia's stuffed fox, where its head bumped against her hip. And I thought distantly that I had never in my life been so aware of the smallness of a child's footsteps. A man in a rusted Bronco stopped for us at the end of the logging road. He was 80 if he was a day, and he had a Bible on the dashboard and a shotgun on the passenger seat and a face like a dried apple. And he looked us up and down and said, "Where are you headed?" "East," Marisol said. 40 miles. "Quarry?" She didn't answer. "Lot of folks been going to the quarry. I'll take you halfway. After that, you walk." He took us halfway. He didn't ask our names. We didn't ask his. When he led us out at a crossroads with a leaning stop sign, he handed Pia a hard candy from a tin he kept in the glove compartment. And Pia thanked him in a voice so small it almost didn't exist. And he drove away, and we never saw him again. And I've thought about him at least once a week for the rest of my life. We walked the rest. We reached the quarry at 3 in the morning. The steel door at the back of the 3rd tunnel was still padlocked, the way Caleb had remembered. And the padlock was old enough that Marisol broke it open with 2 strikes of a tire iron we'd found in the equipment shed. And inside the door was a room, small, dry, concrete-floored, lined with metal shelving that someone had stocked once and forgotten about. Cans, bottled water, a camp stove, a box of paperback novels, a child's drawing taped to the wall, faded, almost white, of a house with a smiling sun above it. We slept on the floor in our coats. Pia slept between us with the fox under her chin. And at some point in the night, her hand found my wrist and held it the way a small animal holds a branch in a storm. And I lay awake and let her hold it. And I understood that whatever I had been before this week was over now, and that whatever I was going to be was going to start in this room, on this floor, with a child's hand around my wrist and a stranger's drawing on the wall. Caleb did not come. He did not come on the 2nd day. He did not come on the 5th day. On the 11th day, a man on a CB radio 2 valleys over said the name Caleb Hatcher in a list of confirmed dead from an incident at a roadblock outside Newport. And Marisol turned the radio off without looking at me. And I went outside and sat against the limestone wall and watched the sky for a long time. And I did not cry then either. And I think now that I should have. And I think now that I will. Eventually, when the part of me that is still running finally sits down. Dr. Lynn made it to Atlanta. We learned that 2 months later, from a different voice on a different radio, in a different valley, in a world that was finally beginning, very slowly, to remember its own name. I am 31 now. Pia is 12. Marisol cut my hair last week with kitchen shears on the porch of the cabin we built ourselves from quarry timber and salvaged tin. And she did not say anything sentimental about it, because she is not a sentimental woman. But she rested her hand on the back of my neck for a moment when she was done. And that was enough. The world did not end. It only narrowed. There are towns again. There are roads that get repaired. There's a woman in Atlanta who, every spring, sends a single coded line over a frequency I'm not supposed to know that says, in effect, the work continues. The donor is anonymous. Thank you. I keep my mother's letters in a tin box under the floorboards. I read one each year. On the anniversary of the morning I watched my uncle bury a steel container in the back acre. I have read them in order 41 times now. I will read them in order until I die. I chose this life. That is the only thing I want on the stone.